When I first began teaching, the back to school night made me so nervous. And it's funny because I feel like most teachers have no problem speaking in front of a class of students or in front of an auditorium of 300 kids in the cafeteria, but put me in front of 30 adults and used to have like a little panic attack. But then once I figured out my routine and what I just do every year and settled into it, it's actually become one of my favorite aspects of teaching. And for one thing, it's way better than chaperoning a middle school dance. But I've actually learned to really, really love back to school night for a lot of reasons we're going to talk about today. Hey there, Time Crunch teachers, and welcome to the show. This is your team teacher, Mariel DeRosier, here to help you organize your teaching, technology, and time management. And here to help me today is every parent's favorite teacher, third grade teacher, Stephanie Hedgepeth-Lopez.
Hello.
And today we're talking about the exact steps that we do for our back to school nights so that you can use or borrow anything from our procedures and use it as a jumping off point for whatever you want to do. So take what you want, skip what you don't like or doesn't work for you, but we're here to help. This is actually going to be my, I think, 19th back to school night. Do you know what?
Oh, I have no idea. It's a lot.
Probably 20-something.
20-something, yes.
20-something back to school night. So we've had a little bit of experience.
Although some of those were I was intervention or coach or something.
Oh, sure.
So my job was parking or
directing
showing
traffic.
people where
Sign
classrooms
in.
were. Yeah.
But I feel like it doubles up because we've also gone as parents. Mm-hmm. So we've done double duty as both teacher, presenter, and parent.
As well.
Yeah. All right, so some of the topics we're going to be covering today are our sample back to school night schedules or topics that we cover. We're also going to go over the most important or crucial items to cover during your presentation. We're going to share some of the sneaky things that we like to include to make either our lives easier throughout the school year or sort of to just get some of those logistics done first thing. And then also some activities we do to win over the families. So before we launch into exactly what we do, I thought it might be nice to have an overview of what our back to school night looks like. So you can kind of hold that in your head and picture what that is. And having worked at a few different schools, I know it's slightly different. But essentially back to school night is usually within, the first few weeks of school?
Yes. If you're lucky, it's really soon.
Right.
Because then it's about what your expectations are and what you're hoping to do, and to also get a little clue about what your students are like from the parents. And it's not so much about how's my student doing or, you having to report anything.
Right. It feels more just like an introduction opposed to a conference.
Yeah, a little more proactive as well.
Excellent. So back to school night's usually the first couple weeks of school. It's when the families come to meet the teacher. Sometimes the students attend. Ours, it's not necessarily specifically for the kids, but kids show up anyways.
Right,
we welcome them.
They don't have anywhere to go.
Yeah.
The parents don't have a babysitter.
Yeah. I think for the schools that are able to offer either childcare or I actually worked at a school that had like a spaghetti feed, like food before. And the attendance was so high for back to school night. So if your school's able to either have food either as a fundraiser or offer to families and have some sort of childcare or, if you have support staff that's willing to kind of come and help, that's really huge.
That would be great.
Also, we are lucky enough that our district has translation services for our families for Spanish and Mixteco. But if you do not have that, that's something to sort of start thinking of before back to school night is, do your written materials need to be translated into one or more languages? Is it possible to have somebody live there translating what you're saying? You mentioned that.
Well, one time I had a parent volunteer in class, like, would you like me to translate for you? And I go, sure, that'd be great. A lot of times I have slides up just to keep me on track and to remind myself of what we're doing and for them. And I try to translate those so at least there's some written language.
And since back to school night is very teacher-centered, meaning you are presenting to the group, you could give all that material to whoever's translating for you ahead of time, and then they kind of have an idea of what's being said, even though some things may change on the fly, because most of your stuff's pre-prepared. I think that would help them. But yeah, a parent volunteer could be super helpful. And for us, usually our presentation, we have 2 presentations. We just do the same one twice, and that way families, if they have a kid in 2nd grade and let's say 5th grade, they could go to each of the teachers' presentations. However, when I taught in middle school and high school, the parents followed the kids' schedule where they went to each class for 10 or maybe 15 minutes.
Oh, I don't know.
But it's so fast. So that's basically what our back to school night looks like. It's super fun for the parents. The parents are always, I think, excited to be there and attend. As a parent myself, I love going to it, being able to meet my kids' teachers and see the classroom. Although I always feel terrible when I taught the younger grades, preschool and 2nd, that the families have to sit in those tiny little chairs. So if there's
I have no problem with that whatsoever.
So if there's any way the custodial janitorial staff could bring in just some of the folding chairs, I highly recommend that. Especially if you have a grandparents or special friends day, please don't make them sit in the little pre-K chairs.
Those are tiny.
They're super tiny. All right, so let's get into what you do, Stephanie, for your back to school night.
Well, now that we have a screen in our room, I like to set up a presentation to be on screen. Like I said before, to keep myself on track and to make sure I don't skip anything, and to also add samples. I like to have a sample daily schedule as well as sample weekly, because I know if I have release time or they go to art or science or there's a different recess schedule during one day of the week, I like to make sure that's included. Another thing that I like to do, and I need to remember to do this, is to have the volunteer forms, because you have to have a volunteer form filled out along with certain procedures like fingerprinting and TB test and everything, and to have those out when the parents are there to remind them if they want to be a classroom volunteer or go on field trips to please fill this out.
Yeah, that's a really great reminder. So if there's any sort of paperwork, or if they have to do fingerprinting or background checks or whatever it might be for volunteers to come to your classroom, have that paperwork ready and you can give it to people right then and there. And you can even do a little sample inventory if there's certain skills or hobbies or things that parents enjoy doing, whether that's coming into class, or I always appreciated as a parent when the classroom teachers needed somebody to do stuff like at home, like cutting out a bunch of stuff or filing things. Like there's always at least 1 or 2 parents that don't mind just sitting in front of the TV and piling through that kind of stuff. So having a little bit of inventory of what they enjoy or would be open to doing, I think is really helpful.
So another thing I like to have out is parent conference sign-ups, because generally what week you're going to be doing parent conferences. At least in our district, we have a whole week where the kids come half day, and then we have the afternoon for parent conferences. And I just see what they would prefer right away. So when I'm setting them up, I already know about usually at least a third of the class that's already signed up for a time that they prefer.
Yeah, I remember when I first started working at the school with you, you said that don't forget to put out your parent-teacher conference sign-up sheets. And I'm like, that is so smart, because you already have the captive audience. They can pull up their schedule or maybe coordinate with...
Or stick it in their phone right now.
Yes, exactly. Stick it in their phone. Or if they're coordinating with other family members for whatever, childcare, or they need to look at their own work schedule because, most of our families are working families, then that is the time they can do it. And I think that's so smart. And even if, for us, it's like a couple months after back to school night, but at least you have,
right, and
half the family.
And people will change and everything. That's fine. But at least I have, at least I know these people can come at these times, and at least that part's set up.
Right, especially if they have a preference, or they're like, I have this day off. Yeah, so.
Or they have to plan for it.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, often communication from the schools or district about parent-teacher or family conference night isn't necessarily far enough ahead of time where people can change their work schedule. So, giving them extra time is super helpful. So yeah, having the volunteer paperwork and having the parent teacher or family teacher conference sign-up sheets is huge.
Another thing I always want to include is my homework policy. Now that has changed through the years, just because of how the kids have changed and then my expectations and having my own kids and arguing about homework. And how I've just changed my outlook on it. In general, my homework philosophy is if you want to do homework, it's great. It's going to help you. But I don't want you to practice anything wrong. I don't want you to stress about it. I had my own kids, like, you know, I don't want that to be a source of contention at your house.
Right. Right.
I want it to be something you could do with your kid or something that they can easily do on their own. But I do try to make it very clear that I do give homework 4 times a week. And I make it so it doesn't change. It's always some sort of reading practice, math practice, and word practice. And so, because there will still be kids that tell their parents, I don't have homework.
Oh, right.
But I want to be able to say, no, remember, back to school night, and here on the handout I gave you.
Here's what you do.
No, there's homework every week, every day. And it's not, and I also like to explain if it's really too hard. I want a note saying it's too hard, or we don't understand this, or
we worked on it for 10 minutes and we got stuck on this, or whatever it might be.
Because that is not, I don't want to cause any more grief at home, because I've been through that grief and I don't want to put that on any other family.
Oh, totally. And it should note that you're teaching in 3rd grade. Last year I taught 2nd. Next year I'm teaching 5th. But especially for the younger grades, a lot of teachers either don't have homework, or it's optional, or it's the type of thing where maybe we send home a folder on Monday and they complete what they can and they turn it in on Friday. So explaining what that looks like so that the families know the expectation and that it's, you know, is or is not mandatory, I think is really important. And then as you teach the older grades, middle and high school, you know, there's usually some sort of learning management system or online thing, or they check it so that they know, and the expectations might be a little more, you know, like strict, like you have to do this, or this has to be turned in by this time period.
And reason I still continue having homework, because some kids need to work on developing that habit of I go home, I practice something, or, you know, I didn't just do it at school and I can forget about it for the rest of my life. You are going to use it again.
Right. And I think it's also, I love that you kind of clarify that the kids do it independently, because I think we have a lot of really great families and parents that want to help their kid and you know, we'll sit there and do it with them, which I think is great. But ultimately, like, we don't want the pressure to be on the families to have to do it, because a lot of our students don't have an adult that can sit with them.
Right. Their parents are working, or it's grandma who only speaks Spanish and wasn't sure what they're supposed to do.
Or they're in 3rd grade and they have a 4th grade older brother that's trying I remember when she did this last year. Wait, give that to me. Let me see.
Yeah, or no, just here, I'll do it for you. I don't want that.
I'll color it in. So kind of understanding that, and understanding there's a huge disparity, I think, in families, or the difference between kids who do have an assistant, an adult who understands the material, can help them, and the kids who don't, and understanding that, you know, can kind of help influence your expectations in terms of what homework looks like.
Another thing is something that I actually do, and I've been doing, and I guess I'll continue to do it, is I send home a little progress report every Friday, which sounds really intense and everything, but basically on the top, it has the kid circle a face on how their behavior was and how their work effort was.
Oh, right on. So it's like frowny face, smiley face, neutral face, and they just like circle or whatever.
Confused or whatever. And then like, I did well with this, I need help with this.
So the kids fill that out.
The kids do. And then I usually have a blurb. I always type in like what's coming up, like there's testing coming up, or a field trip, or whatever. And then I try desperately to write one thing on the paper. And it might just be, they did great, you know.
Right.
Or please be on time, or school starts at, 8 o'clock, not 8:20.
You do that every week for every student?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And now I don't get them all back.
Well,
unfortunately, because you're supposed to sign it, and the parents, but for the parents who do, it's been a really great communication tool. They can say, oh, we tried this homework, or they're really having trouble with subtraction, or this kid is bugging them, or I'm worried about whatever.
Yeah, I think that's really, really clever. I love that, because I like that the students have a little bit of autonomy in them filling out their progress. Mm-hmm. You have a communication tool to the families. They have, the same one they can return back. And what's nice is you've eliminated any of the barriers of, it's a piece of paper in a folder that's coming back and forth anyways, right? Like they don't have to log on and look up how to spell Hedgepeth Lopez or DeRosier because our district uses our full first and last names. So just writing a note on the paper, I think, is really great. And as a parent, I'd like to kind of let teachers know, just because you're not seeing the thing come back or it's not being signed doesn't mean that the parent didn't or family didn't see it or interact in it, because I've seen those and like forgotten to sign them or whatever. No, that's
why it's not like I make it sound like it's mandatory, but it's really not. And I will keep them for a while so that, if something comes up at parent conference, it's like, well, I didn't know about that. And it's like, well, you signed this paper here. Right. When I said they were having trouble with X, Y, or Z, and not to call them out, but to show them that this is where you can look, or this is where you can let me know. And like I said, I get probably a third of them back, but the ones I do get back, I feel like I've been really communicating with those parents.
Totally.
And I've had good feedback with that, because they'll let me know when something's going on.
Yeah. And I feel like, even as a teacher who has used really robust online learning management systems with like grades and comments and whatever, as a parent, I know that's all accessible for my kids, but I think it's easy for us to forget the barriers and the steps needed to log on. You have more than one kid. You got to pull up all the information. You have to remember like which teacher teaches which subject, whatever, and like log that. Then you have to remember, okay, this teacher has this different grading policy and whatever. Having quite literally a piece of paper that just goes back and forth sometimes is the easiest communication.
Because I had 3 kids, and inevitably, they would have either, even when they were all at the same school, and then when they were at 3 different schools because of their ages, just to be able to know what was where and what teacher wanted this, and this teacher really wanted all the homework, and this teacher didn't care. It was a struggle. So I get the parent end, and I like to remember that I was a parent and I had this. I had 3 different kids with 3 different personalities that did things 3 different ways. So it's important to remember all those things. Also, going over basic curriculum and standards for the year, obviously. And a couple other things. One, I know I've done this in the past, but I don't think I've done it in the past couple of years. And I think I've done it more at parent conferences, but have a little parent survey, like the best form of communication. If you have any apps like Seesaw or Class Dojo whatever, to make sure they get signed up with that so that they can see what their student is doing. And also just to know, are they an email person? Are they a text person? What kind of communicator are they? So that or when is the best time to call? Like, would they prefer a call in the evening or like during the school day or whatever, so that you have a better chance of getting a hold of them if there is an issue, or even if you want to say something really nice, which I suggest.
Yeah, I think that's super important to figure out what their best or preferred communication style is, because I know there's definitely families that would prefer in person or over the phone verbal communication versus an email, especially since depending on your school or district, I know as a parent, I can get tons of like email or electronic communication from the school and district. And so when the teacher sends one on their own, sometimes it doesn't look much different than all that other like informational flyers that come daily. And so for me, email isn't the best form of communication because it can get lost, especially as a teacher in the same district too. Like I'm getting all the teacher stuff. So, perhaps a phone call or a face-to-face or a carpool conversation would be better. But yeah, having maybe just a simple, like, I think you do it where they just like check a box, right? Or they just write email or whatever it might be. Yeah, something like that. And then you can just kind of have all those for later when you need to contact them. But especially the time of day, because some families, most of our families are working families, but some, want to know as soon as something happens during the day. And some are like, well, I'm really hard to get a hold of at my work or employment, so I would prefer if it was after 4 or whatever it might be.
And the only other thing is, put up your wish list. Like, I like to ask for decent Kleenex that doesn't chafe the little cute noises.
You mean that isn't like a 1-ply sandpaper?
Yeah. that they go, and they because there are kids that like use one little tissue to like dab and throw it away. And I'm just always running out of tissue. And especially during cold season, the soft tissues are so much more desirable. things like extra sharpened pencils, whatever it is that you would really appreciate. Hand sanitizer.
Yeah.
All
that kind of stuff. Yeah, especially when I worked in private school, they had a lot of what am I trying to say? Mandatory volunteer hours. So the families either could, volunteer, or they could purchase supplies or that sort of thing. So if your school does that, this is the time to get those lists and that out. Even if not, families I found are always willing to help. Like, for example, when we had our book fair, we, for some reason, the book fair didn't send bags for the kids to take home books and whatever. Yeah. And so we had a family who, I don't know if they worked at or owned a grocery store, and they're like, oh, we can donate bags. And so they just donate a bunch of bags. So it's worth it to ask, because often the families like helping out in whatever way they can.
Which made me think about, we really should have more sign-ups for helping out at this school, to reach out to parents. And hopefully maybe this year that we can do that.
I had a school, I feel like this is a little bit of a euphemism, but I liked it. They would ask, what's your time, talent, or treasure? Which is a nice way of saying, are you going to come in? Do you want to just pay the thing, or whatever? But I liked it because it opened it up to oh, yeah, if there's something you enjoy. There was a parent, he worked at a local animal sanctuary thing and talked about conservation, but he just happened to have a bunch of taxidermied local wildlife, and he brought it into my son's preschool, and you would have thought he was a celebrity. I mean, they freaked out a little beaver and an eagle. They loved it. That was his time, his talent, and his treasure, is those taxidermied animals. So
maybe also making sure that parents realize that they're a partner in their child's education. Yes. And a lot of them feel oh, you're the teacher, but to show them or to remind them what they can contribute. Mm-hmm. I think is also a good message, and kind of sets a tone for the year that, we're all in this together.
Totally. And I feel too, having it doesn't, even though I'm making jokes about it being a monetary contribution, I once had a student's grandmother who was oh, well, do you need anybody to read? And I'm yes. And she would come in and read stories, or the kids would read to her. And it was great. They loved it. They all called her grandma. It was adorable. And so, yeah, things like that are really cool too. I found they're always willing to help.
So I think that's basically what I do. Oh, and if you need a time filler or something, that you want, you might ask them to write a note to their child.
Oh yeah, that's fun. And or they could even just do it on a little sticky note and leave it on the desk or whatever too.
Right.
Yeah, and that way when the kid comes in, they have it. That's sweet. All right. So some of the things I like to have ready before back to school night happens is throughout those first couple of weeks of school, I like to take lots of pictures of the kids, and I just do it on my phone. They're not special. They're not set up or anything. They're just candid shots. And the reason why I do that is if you can just get at least maybe 10 or 15 photos of the students, working in their centers or whatever it might be, you can throw that together really easily on either Google Pics or Apple Photos of creating a slideshow. You just select the photos, you dump it into the template. It lets you choose the music and whether it just loops or whatever it might be. And I love that because every family loves seeing pictures of their own kids. And it also gets rid of that kind of weird awkward time where people
where
are
everybody, you're quiet. You may sit here. Please sign this in. Sign in here. Yeah.
It can feel kind of awkward because, it's silent. They're walking in. They're sitting in those weird little tiny chairs. They want to look through their kid's desk and everything like that. So at the very least have some soft background music playing. But if you have the time to start just taking a bunch of pictures and throwing it together in a slideshow, I love having that because it gives something for them to do and look at, and it sort of starts a conversation. And often they will get to see what their kid's doing. I will say the one thing I sort of miss about online school is I think it was really great for the parents to see what their kids are doing. Because as a parent, you don't get to see, you only see what the kid comes home and tells you, which is mostly this is what I had for snack and this is what I played at
And this is
lunch.
What this kid did at recess.
Yeah, exactly. And so anyways, having pictures of those as the families walk in, I think is really fun and it's nice. So start taking pictures.
To steal that idea.
Yeah, and it's super easy. And one time I kind of spaced and I just took a bunch of pictures the day of and I threw it together. So you don't have to plan too far ahead. Just day of is fine too.
Oh, it could even be certain areas of your classroom, like the classroom library.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah. Or even just recess games and that kind of thing. Something I always tell new teachers that I like to remind myself about too is the thing to remember about back to school night is that your audience wants you to succeed. So it's not like, Shark Tank or an elevator pitch where you're trying to like convince somebody to invest money and, they're going to rip apart your presentation. They are there because they love their child or their family member or whoever they're there supporting. And they want to like the teacher. Like
right.
It's a positive experience, right? And I'm a huge proponent of having at least one or two positive interactions with families before you have to make a tough phone call, before there's maybe a little bit more of a challenging moment. So back to school night, that's why I love it. They're happy to be there. They want you to succeed. Even if you're nervous, it's totally fine. And it's nice to have that positive interaction. And if back to school night's kind of later for you in the year, you can still achieve that through doing carpool. That's why carpool, even though I end up like hitting cars and stuff to slow down. It's actually like my favorite duty because you get to have like quick little check-ins with families as you're like walking the kid or opening the door. And I think that's really important to have those positive. You could do a phone call home. You could do a welcome video. Stephanie and I did that this year. That was really fun.
Yeah, I'll have to do another
I know, I'll have to do it. I'll leave a link in the description box of what I did because you can basically do it completely for free. But all it is it's saying, hi, I'm Miss Drizzy. I'm going to be your new teacher this year. Check out the room, that kind of thing. And it's really fun for the kids because everyone wants to see who their teacher is. They want to see what the room's going to look like.
And, on to piggyback on that, also to remember that some parents, especially when you have the younger kids, like this is one of their first school experiences.
Oh,
like
yeah, that's a good point.
And I've noticed that parents of this is the oldest kid, are much more nervous and anxious and want to make sure their kid's doing right, as opposed to, the third, like me, the third kid's like, okay, whatever. But you kind of have to remember where they're coming from because they want their kids to succeed. And they also haven't done third grade with any of their other kids so far. So they are interested, and you do want to set them up to know this is what to expect.
Yeah, that's a really good point because depending on the birth order of the kid, it can be a different experience.
Right, totally.
Yeah, like with my eldest, I was like, okay, I want to make sure that he's like well behaved and he like learns how to read and like he's doing all his work. With the second one, I'm like, okay, listen, you're calling his father. Wait, messes up because this one, I don't got time for this one.
Try having 3. The third one, like, I don't know. What did he do? Oh, that's horrible. Don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. Right. So or they have an only child, like they haven't experienced that grade level ever before, right? And so it's all very like new. You touched on this briefly, but if you have sort of a big thing that happens, like in 5th grade, they go to science camp. It's overnight. It's a big deal. Make sure they include that, even if it's something that's like at the end of the year, if you're starting off the year with a field trip to the fair, this is the time to preface that so they understand. Because like we're saying, if this is their eldest kid or their only kid that they have, like they have not experienced that. So they don't know that they might need to do that, trip, or if it's like a big assignment, like, if they're making something or doing like science fair would be another one I would definitely point out, so that the families are prepared for that. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about my actual slide presentation, and don't feel like this needs to be over the top. This can just be super, super simple. I'm just a huge proponent of having a little bit of a visual while you're up there talking, especially as a teacher. I think we tend to roll into sort of teacher speak and curriculum and things that, most people don't communicate that way or understand maybe that terminology. So having a visual, I think, is super helpful. If you go to Canva, they have tons of free, very basic templates that you can use. Google Slides templates has the exact same thing. You can use that. But the things I like to include is just a very little bit of background about me, basically how long I've been teaching, the grades or subject areas I've taught. I like to share that I've had admin experience. I was a dean of students. And of course, I like to absolutely showcase that I love teaching and I'm super excited for the year and what I'm looking forward to, but just the basic facts. They don't need to go into like, I've seen ones where it's like teachers load into like every hobby they've ever done or like the trips they go on, which is like great and really sweet. But like I don't travel or do anything. So I've just got my history to share. I don't have like fun, exciting
Yeah, well,
things.
like I like to share too that I'm a parent so that I get it.
Yeah, that can be helpful
I get
too.
when those things happen.
Totally. I also, Stephanie touched on this, but I just have a quick overview of the subjects I'll be teaching or topics or units covered. Very simple daily schedule. It doesn't need to look like your lesson plans. It's just basically like we do PE on these days. They go to art twice a week, or they have music, or garden, or whatever it might be. Especially with the younger kids, they kind of get their days and schedules mixed up. So it's nice to be able to share with the families, like, oh no, we do PE on these days, or we do this on that day.
Oh, on that note, I like to include, like I said, I send home a mini progress report. I include a picture of that, or like I have a homework sheet that goes home. I include a picture of that so they know what to look for.
Oh, that's a really good point. Right. So if you have a kind of newsletter or form or something standard that goes home, include a screenshot or an example of that. The other really great thing about doing all of this on an online presentation is for any families who couldn't make it afterwards, hopefully you have a lot of their contact information either through the office or, through gathering the information.
Or through their kids' Google Classroom or whatever.
Right, exactly. You can just push out that presentation so that members who couldn't make it can at least access
even
it.
so they can refer to things like, what was your teacher's email? And what room are you in?
Yeah, it's a lot of information to have at once. Also, with the middle to high school grades, of course, I have, whatever learning management system or LMS we use, show them maybe really quickly how they can access checking their kids' grades or assignments or whatever. And you don't need to walk them through step by step because they won't have something in front of them to do it, but including some sort of link or documentation that you have that they can access later when they want to look at their kids' stuff. Maybe your sample syllabus if you have that, but I would shy away from just reading at the people.
Oh, yeah.
That can be a little rough. If you need time fillers, we'll kind of talk about that in a minute, but stay away from just reading full paragraphs of things because one, they'll kind of tune out after a minute.
Well, that's why it's good to have like a picture and a little blurb or maybe even a link on your slide for when you share it later, but then just work on describing what certain topic.
Right. And this is not to say, like, I totally script my presentation. You just don't want it to be chunks of paragraphs. Yeah, like I said, it's nice to have it online because you can share it afterwards, and make sure on that slide you have your contact info, whether it's your email or phone extension or whatever it might be, so that they can just pull it up quickly. This is also super helpful. I actually once worked at a middle and high school where there was, I don't know, let's say like 10 sixth grade teachers, and the sixth graders it was more like a middle school where they went to different teachers. And we set up an email that basically went to all the sixth grade teachers. And what was nice about that is if a family was like the kid was going to be out, maybe they had an injury or they're on a vacation or something happened, or if they had a question about something that went to all the teachers, even if their own kid had, I don't know, like 6 out of those 10 teachers, whatever, like the rest of us could ignore the email. But having like one email, because I remember these poor parents would have to say like, oh, the kid's gonna be out Friday, and spending so much time trying to figure out the 7 teachers your kid has or whatever is really hard. And maybe your school has another system or a way, maybe just go straight to attendance and they take care of it. But a way that they can kind of email the group, I think is really helpful.
Well, like I was telling you this, I was in the office one day when a parent came in to pick up a kid. And I remember the office manager asking like what room they were in.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it was the parent that doesn't take care of all that stuff. So they had no idea what room they were in or what the teacher's name is or anything. And it's not bad on the parent. It's just, they have a lot of things on their mind, and help them out.
Dude, you could ask me what your classroom number is, and I wouldn't.
Oh, I forget my own classroom number because I was in another room for a while, and every once in a while I'll tell someone the wrong number, and they go there like, you weren't there.
Or they'll like renumber a wing, and you're like, wait, what room am I now? Yeah.
Oh, I have to count like, okay, there's that. I know that room, so I need to count Okay, that's number 34.
Yeah, and especially, man, if there's like multiple kids or if it's like
So
a
if we
grandparent.
can't even remember the name,
Yeah,
then
don't expect the families
too.
You were speaking a little bit about sometimes there's things they need to sign up for or kind of log into, whether it's Google Classroom or our district uses Remind as a communication email or text. And having a QR code or maybe just steps to sign up that you can just hand out. They don't need to do it on the spot, but having that so that later they can log in or sign up is really nice to have that kind of printed out and ready to go. And if you are creating a Meet the Teacher newsletter that you gave to the students or a Meet the Teacher like video or whatever, like just print off extra copies. Like I hand it to the families because who knows what happens in the backpack shove. But if you've already created something like that for the kids, just print out some extra ones and have them ready to hand out to the families. I also, on the first day of school, and I'll be sure to link the video of this because I have a template that you can completely use and modify for your own use. But I basically, the first day, send the kids home with homework for their families, where they write a letter of introduction to me about the kid, and the kid can write a separate one. They can write one with their family, and it can be as, detailed as the family wants or as not. It's totally up to them. But I have found it really helpful because it not only tells me about the kid's interests, but also if the kid has any interpersonal conflicts with other students in the class or something they're feeling anxious about, or maybe a subject that they really love and then one that they have challenge with. And
or sometimes even knowing like they spend Monday through Friday with this parent and the weekend with this parent.
That's a really good
or
point.
They go home with this parent and you'll notice things on Monday or something. It's
right.
If they are willing to share that information, it's really nice to have right away so you can help the child.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the family situation's super helpful because then you can note too, okay, I need to send duplicates of everything to this family. Or in my kid's case, it's like grandpa always picked him up. So it's like, you might not see me, but you'll see grandpa.
Right.
And so, that kind of thing. But anyways, I really love having that letter. And, I ahead of time we'll have it translated into the languages of the families, and then the families can write back to me in whatever their preferred communication style is, and then I find translators to help me understand it. But I find that really helpful. So at back to school night, since it's a couple weeks later, I just send out a quick reminder about that, if you haven't had a chance to write it, or if you would prefer, obviously sometimes there's confidential, maybe medical information or family situation that the family would rather talk to me about.
Right.
And I like having that open because it's not really like parent-teacher conference material because it's not about the academics of the school. It's just more about where the kid is and what they're going through and maybe some help they might need.
And how their family operates because families are different and they operate in different ways.
Yeah, and I have found that having that invitation out there is really helpful because most of the families are like very sweet and well-intentioned, and sometimes their first impulse is like, well, I don't want to like burden the teacher. I don't know if they need to know this. And so as a teacher, if you can say like, I want to support your kid however you think is best for them or like what they need, I think is really helpful. And so I have a huge return rate on that. And if writing a whole letter, it might seem daunting for your families or community, especially if you work with families that, they might not have translation services or whatever it might be, having just one or two simple questions or something, like what hobbies does your kid really love or what are their interests, or even something as simple as that, I think is really helpful for families.
Right. And you can always do that, like have a few questions and then, is there anything else you'd like to tell me? And some people will tell you everything and some people will like, nope. And that's okay.
Totally. Yeah. Like I think the longest I ever got, I think I have 5-page typed letters in ones. And then I've also had a note on a Post-it note. So there's lots of different ways that the families can, but just having that invitation, I think, is really helpful. I also think it's really important. And if it makes you feel uncomfortable to say this, then ask your admin to do this. I have no problem saying this, but back to school night is not the time for parent-teacher conferences. And you can say that in a very kind way, but you can say, hey, parent-teacher conferences, I want to be able to give you my full attention. And we dive into what's important for supporting your kid. But tonight is just an overview of what's going on. So that's why I love your idea of the sign up for parent-teacher conferences, because then they can get their name in and get on there and make sure.
And if they feel like there's something really pressing they want you to know, then I'd say, you know what, that sounds really like we really need to talk about this. Would you prefer a phone call, or do you want to set up something next week?
Yeah, and on my actual sign-in sheet, I have found this to be very helpful. It sounds very simple, but as a parent, let me tell you, it is so nice on the sign-up sheet if the kid's name is already on there.
Oh, that's a really good idea.
Like,
I hadn't even thought about that.
Dude, 19 years in, and I just thought to do this last year. So normally the sign-up sheet is like student name, family name, and then like contact info and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And it's like you can never fit your email in the tiny little column. Okay.
Yeah.
This year, that first column is the student's name alphabetized by last name. So the families just look through. They literally just put a check next to the kid's name. Yep, I was here. And then I have a column that says, basically, like, would you like a follow-up meeting with Mr. Rosier? And then the check boxes are like, no, thank you, like, or whatever.
Yeah.
And then it's like, yes. And then it's like email or phone call or whatever. And then if they want, they can leave their email and or their phone call.
That's a good idea.
And, but yeah, having just the kid's name there has sped up that sign-in process.
Well,
so
I would
much
almost
more
like
quickly.
to have a column of like their name and make that part wider. So if grandma comes in, I know it was grandma. If
Oh, I got it.
like
Right. So it's not just one name.
Or also, a lot of times people have completely different names than their children. And I'm like,
Totally.
who is this? Because they'll forget to put the kid's name.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, I'm process of elimination, or I'm looking through all the emergency. Who is this parent?
Yeah.
So, but I like the idea of having the names there.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Because, yeah, there's lots of different like family names, or you'll find out too if you're a new teacher. It's like, well, this is what the kid's name is on the roster, but that is not the name they go by.
Or someone got remarried and they have a different name.
Oh,
or
totally.
Whatever.
And there's always like 12 juniors and whatever in the class. Yeah. So having that sign-in sheet is easy and as quick as possible, I think, is really huge. And just print out multiple ones. Like, you don't need it on one piece of paper. Like, you can have I have like 2 or 3 of the exact same thing duplicated on clipboards, and they just like hand them out. And if they sign it, they do. And then later I can like, cull the information. This is actually also the only time in the year I do Kahoot. I mean, I might do it 1 or 2 times with the kids, but I just find like setting up those games takes so much time for like a 3-minute payoff. Like,
I have not delved into that yet.
Anywho, it was a lot more fun when it was online. But anywho, back to school night, I make a Kahoot. But what it is it's, fun or interesting things about me. It's also topics or subjects or field trips or activities the kids are going to be doing. And then it might just be sort of like funny facts or funny things about what we're learning about. I also have up there maybe some enrichment opportunities if your school has those, like whether it's clubs or sports or activities. And then that way, it's sort of like a fun, silly way that the parents get to learn this information without you just like talking. And what's great about Kahoot is they can just pull out their phone. If you have a Chrome cart with Chromebooks in it, they can just use those really quick and scan the QR code. But I have found that families get like strangely competitive. And if you've ever done Kahoot, you want to do the random name generator, so like they don't know who the, like wise bat is or whatever funny combination they come with. But they love it. They get super competitive. And then I always put in a couple of questions that if students are in the audience, they know the answer to. So they get really jazzed and they're like, no, Dad, it's B. And then like tell them. So anyways, it's a really fun way to end it. It's also a really great time filler. So if you have a really long chunk, like if your presentations are supposed to be 30 minutes, man, Kahoot can eat up a ton of time because it takes a while for them to log in.
Right.
They get to play it. Then afterwards, they want to ask questions about the questions. That's really fun and kind of silly. Then I do that. The other thing, and this is like extra credit, but I did this when I first started teaching 2nd grade, and the kids just loved it. Basically, I took a read aloud book, and I filmed myself reading it just with my phone, flipping the pages like you're doing it for the kids. And then all I did is I uploaded that to Google Drive and tied the link to a QR code. So at the end of back to school night, the families get a little printout of a QR code that the kids can scan, and it's me just reading them a bedtime story. So it's very cute. So sweet. And I'll make sure to leave a link in the description notes exactly how to do that, because I have a video how to do it. And you can do that any time of the year, but it was adorable. Like, when I first did it, I was a little sheepish because I was like, I don't know if any of the kids are going to watch this. And then I have to say, it kind of set me up because they're like, when are we going to get another story? And I was like, oh man, I got to film a bunch of like stories. But they loved it. And it can be like super low tech. Like it doesn't have to be all like special or whatever. It's just literally me turning pages, reading a book. Anyways, so as a recap, I like to take photos and that way I can share them as the little slideshow when they enter. You're going to want to create a really simple, very simple visual presentation, but something you can send out to families later. You can do a little Kahoot or recorded story at the end. And then also, make sure if there's any sort of signups or paperwork or field trips or any of that kind of stuff, you'll want to have all that ready. And most importantly, please remember they are rooting for you. It's really fun. They want to have a good time and support you. And they're just sort of excited to see what's going to happen for their kid during the year.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. So we like to end the podcast with a classroom story. Do you have any classroom stories about back to school night, or should I launch into my
not
kind of
really? The only thing I was telling you this that I remember when we came back like from the pandemic and being out at recess with kids. This girl just came up to me and said, I don't know how to do recess anymore.
Oh,
which made me think of like, so when parents are coming to back to school night, when were they in school and everything?
Right,
so they don't also, don't necessarily remember what it's like. And so I feel your job at back to school night is to let them know what it's like for your kid.
That's a really good point. So I have a kind of funny story if you have an admin who can do this for you, or you could certainly do it yourself. But sometimes, because it's sort of a captive audience, I think families or parents feel like, oh, I can talk to the teacher for a really long time right now because they're standing in front of me and I have all of these things that I want to communicate, which is why Stephanie and I spent so much time talking about all the different avenues that they can use to communicate with you later, because back to school night, there usually is an actual time frame, right? Like you have to get to the next presentation or it needs to just end.
And you do need to sleep before the next day.
Oh, yeah. And you do need, because I don't think I've ever worked at a school where back to school night was a Friday, because no one would show up if it was a Friday. So chances are you are teaching the next morning after this back to school night, right? And so, it needs to end. There needs to be an end point. And so what I used to do is I would just come on the loudspeaker and I would thank everyone for coming. And I would just give a quick heads up that I was going to set the alarm in 10 minutes and that in 5 minutes, the parking lot was going to be locked. And I'm going to be real honest here. I don't even know the code for the alarm. I was not trusted with, that was not my job to set the alarm, which is great because I probably would have entered it wrong and set it off. But I did know an alarm would be set eventually. So it's not a total fib. But nothing gets people moving faster than thinking about their car getting locked in a parking lot or setting off a school alarm. So if you have somebody to come on the loudspeaker and say that, sometimes that kind of has something, which is why you want some sort of sign up or some way that you can contact them or they can contact you later when you have the time. Because I didn't mind having those conversations with families, but I never wanted them to feel like often they're trying to give you information that might be a little more confidential or particular.
Right, and there's other people walking around. You're like,
I
want to know this, but I don't think they all need to know it.
Right,
as well.
And so you want to be able to have that private conversation or that meeting. And so I can give my full attention to the person too, and I'm not, worried about other stuff going on in the classroom.
Plus you have that other parent like, well, I'm waiting until they're done so I can tell my thing.
Right. Yeah, you don't want a line started. Right. So you can just remind people that the alarm is going to get set. Even if you don't know the code, it's okay. It will be set by somebody. But if you have a classroom story that you would like us to feature in an upcoming episode, please email us at podcast@thetimecrunchteacher.com. But we love hearing from you, so please feel free to give us your feedback or comments or topics for future episodes. We read every email and comment, and we love hearing from all of you. So thank you so much for taking the time to contact us. Any last minute thoughts on back to school night?
Just remember that, it's your show. You're in charge. So
right.
You could go with that attitude. Yep. I'm the teacher. I'm telling you what I'm doing.
That's right. And if all else fails, eventually you just got to walk out anyway and shut the hour and you're done.
And then it'll be over and you get to go home.
Yes. And then you get to see all the little kids the next day and you're like, whew, that's so much easier teaching 8-year-olds than having a bunch of parents.
Yes, totally.
Thank you so much for your kind attention. Until next time, teachers. Bye for now.